That is why if you do a peace deal and you help Palestine become prosperous, they will have less terrorism.
Hamas is standing in the way of the peace deal.
But how are you going to, guys? You're driving me crazy. You're purposely saying an impossible standard. You just want to occupy the Palestinians. Please just be honest about it. You don't think they're human. You think that they're violent by nature. So you do state violence over and over again.
That is not.
You put your boot on their neck and you imprison them for 50 years.
Look, you don't want me to put words in your mouth. I don't want you to put words in my mouth. So let's move on to Israel Palestine. Go ahead, Sitch.
Yeah, so you had an interesting conversation with Ben Glebe on Israel Palestine recently, and in it, I believe there's this question comes up a lot, which is that I think that most people have pretty deep sympathies for seeing innocent Palestinians be killed, and we see the photos of dead people. We see the photos of like entire blocks and buildings reduced to rubble. And we all look at this and we feel, obviously we're not sociopaths, we all feel great sense of empathy. And I kind of had a conversation with my own father about this recently, and the question that always comes to my mind about this is, what should Israel do to be able to fight against Hamas without causing this level of civilian casualties? And I believe in your conversation that you brought up special forces, but is it viable? Is this idea that like special forces can just, exist in Gaza and just root out all Hamas without having like the military literally roll in? Is that a viable option?
Yeah, it is. But let's break that down into its two component parts. So they say, well, before we send in ground troops, we wanted to destroy Gaza. So they've leveled literally half the buildings in Gaza. I mean, that is a untold, unacceptable massacre. Over 11,000 civilians killed, over 4,600 children killed. And so if you said to me, hey, in order to rescue 200 hostages, will you murder 4,600 children? I would say, under no goddamn circumstances would I do that. No way. You'd have to be inhumane to the nth degree to do that. If you said to me, somebody hurt your family members, they're in a building, underneath a hospital, do you want to bomb the hospital? I'd say, God damn it, don't you even think about it for a second. They're under a school, do you want to bomb the school? Hell no, I do not want to bomb the school. So that option, I think, is monstrous and should have never even been considered. Now, you say, well, okay, the special operations, the special forces, it's very difficult. Hamas has these tunnels. The tunnels are probably booby-trapped, and you're going to have to be inside a civilian population if you don't do mass movement of the population, et cetera, et cetera. I go, yeah, that's why there's special forces. And will it be a greater threat to soldiers? Yes, it will. And that's why you're special forces. If you didn't want to sign up for the job, then you shouldn't have signed up. The special forces isn't, I murder everyone in your path, so there's almost no bodies left, and then you go clean up the couple of people that are left. That's not special forces. That's just like the last remnants of your genocide squad. Mm-hmm. And so, no, there is a way that you can take more risk militarily, but actually get the job done. And by the way, to the effectiveness of what actually works, even Netanyahu said in an ABC interview that once they brought in ground forces, it created pressure on Hamas to release the hostages. That is an admission that 7,000 bombs that they dropped on Gaza had no effect at all. And so we have to be honest and say that obviously the right-wing government of Israel is committing these massacres on purpose. Don't give me this crap about how, oh, I thought maybe there was a Hamas guy under half the buildings in Gaza, and I had to relocate and ethnically cleanse over 1 million people because I thought maybe I'll hit a guy in a tunnel once or twice. Come on. Nonsense talk of collateral damage. No, it's unfortunately deeply inhumane and clearly war crimes.
So, like, if you were theoretically president and you were kind of faced with a similar situation as Israel, do you think that, you have to weigh the options of, this, bombing campaign obviously is going to cause, significant damage to the civilian population of Gaza, and you're going to kill a lot of civilians, versus if you send in the ground troops kind of immediately, because like, special forces need to have a perimeter set up around, like if special forces are going to go investigate some tunnel, they're going to need like a large amount of perimeter set up in all the buildings. You're going to have like all these ground troops there. You're going to have vehicles there if they can even fit wherever the tunnel is. You're going to need all this stuff. And it's, presumably it's going to lead to a significant loss of life. Thousands of Israeli military people would die, a lot of people who are conscripted and don't have a choice. And, if you're the president, are you going to make the decision to basically say, well, we're going to have our military die so that an equal number or lesser number of civilian or even greater number of civilians on the other side survive?
Yes. So let me explain. There's actually a great example. It happened here in America, and I tell you what I would have done, and I actually said it on air back when it happened. The Young Turks has been around forever, so we were actually on the air at the time. So after we got hit on 9/11, we had a similar choice as Israel, and except that we did even something more monstrous. We attacked a country that didn't even attack us, which was Iraq, and killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. So would I choose that route? Hell no, I wouldn't. So on the other hand, should we go after bin Laden? I said, yeah, we should be hell bent on getting bin Laden. And now here's an amazing story that got buried, and it's amazing that it got buried because New York Times reported it. So back in 2004, earlier than that. No, right in the beginning of the Afghanistan campaign. It got reported in 2004, but it happened really early on in the Afghanistan campaign before we had invaded Iraq. Don Rumsfeld got a notice from one of our generals. We've got bin Laden cornered in Tora Bora. Should we pursue? And Rumsfeld, the traitor to America, said, do not pursue. That is unconscionable. Now, you say, well, if the special forces pursue bin Laden inside Tora Bora, a couple of them might die. Yeah, you're special forces. And your job is to get bin Laden, the sumbitch who attacked us and who murdered our civilians. That's what the point of special forces is. So yes, I would have pursued bin Laden with special forces, and we would have gotten him. And then we wouldn't have had to invade Iraq. And we wouldn't have had to kill those hundreds. We never had to kill those hundreds of thousands of civilians. So it was monstrous what they did. And Israel should learn from our mistakes. And so if you say, well, no, I'd rather kill tens of thousands of innocent babies and grandmothers and aunts and uncles so that the military doesn't have to do their job, I vehemently disagree. No, you send the military to do a hard job. That's their job. And by the way, the Israeli Defense Forces are excellent at their job. And I believe that they could do that job. I don't want any of those kids dying either, by the way. I want people to understand that everyone involved is a human being. These labels are nonsense. Israeli, Palestinian, Jewish, Muslim, Christian. They're just labels we put on ourselves. We're all human beings. So I don't want those poor kids in the Israeli Defense Forces dying either. But if you say to me, the military doing its job, or we murder civilians, and it doesn't even accomplish anything, that's not a close question.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things it's very difficult for me to wrap my mind around that, as president of a country, you're going to face your people and you're going to go out there and say, we're going to sacrifice, thousands of your children to do a military action. It's always, obviously it's always going to be easier to kind of do, the safer bet. But putting that aside for a second, I mean, you were saying that you think that Israel is intentionally, or the Israeli government, I should say, is intentionally just trying to cause as much destruction as possible. Or is that a mischaracterization of what you said?
No, I definitely think that. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you tell me, is the Israeli Defense Forces the worst military in the world? They just keep missing. They've missed like 7,000 times. Oh, well, maybe we got a couple of Hamas. At one point in the conflict, they had reported that there was 13 dead Hamas soldiers and 8,000 dead civilians. Really? Israeli Defense Forces, the worst aim in the history of the military? No. And how are you going to kill a Hamas guy? By dropping a bomb on a residential building. And they bombed like 53 ambulances. You think the Hamas guys got into ambulances with giant sirens? Like, woo, we're right here, Israel. You keep bombing ambulances, but we're right here. No, they're in the tunnels. They knew the bombing was going to have no effect. Netanyahu admitted it had no effect. They did the bombing to teach them a lesson, because all the Palestinians understand is violence. That's exactly what the violence say. Netanyahu is a monster. He's a blight on Israeli history and the Israeli people. They should get rid of him as soon as possible. He let him get hit. He's totally corrupt. He tried to end their democracy. He took his eye off the ball, and he's trying to make up for it with massacres. But I've never seen anyone do more reputational damage to a country than Netanyahu has done to Israel. After the October 7th attacks, Israel had, for the first time in a long time, a lot of goodwill. And they could have done amazing things with that goodwill. But Netanyahu burned it all up. And so now the world hates Israel again, because we're all seeing Palestinian children dying. And everybody's screaming, stop killing them. For God's sake, we can see it. Don't do it. Stop killing them. And Netanyahu brags about, no, I'm going to go more, and I'm going to drop more bombs, and then they will heal. No, end the occupation, you monster. I mean, how long are you guys going to keep this occupation happening? 56 years. Is 156 years going to make a difference? And if you say you can't end the occupation because the Palestinians will attack you, they're the only people in the world that can't control themselves, that can't handle sovereignty, that can't handle freedom, and they're violent by nature. You're admitting that you're a racist. And you're saying, I think the Palestinians are subhuman, different than other humans. No, it's absurd. And can peace treaties work? Of course. Israel did a peace treaty with Egypt. It has worked brilliantly for over 40 years. We already know what the answer is. And look, let me give you a scenario where Israel becomes a hero. And I would love that. That's my dream, okay? Where at the end of this, whatever this is that Netanyahu is doing, these massacres, I mean, I hope to God they can actually do a negotiation to get the hostages back, right? But once they have the hostages back, this idea of eradicating Hamas, when do we know they're eradicated? It's an impossible goal. Are they going to raise their hand and go, we're eradicated? When do the Palestinians get to vote and say we're not being represented by Hamas anymore? They can't. It's a purposely impossible goal. So that's the wrong path. The correct path, an amazing path, the path that makes Israelis heroes is, as soon as this conflict is over, they go 1967 borders, and that's it, unilaterally. Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, you're welcome. Oh my God, it would be the most magnanimous act, literally one of the most magnanimous acts in world history. It would make them infinitely safer. The world would love them for it. And then the world would talk of how brave and courageous and wonderful and generous the Jewish people are. And wouldn't that be amazing? And if they did that, they would be heroes forever and ever and ever. It's actually a relatively straightforward solution, but they won't. At least this government won't. Israel has the capacity to do it. They just have to get rid of the right-wing government.
Mm-hmm. Well, regarding the peace thing, like, at least from my perspective, I don't know what other people are saying. I don't think it's a race issue. I think it comes down to the idea that, Gaza is under control of Hamas, which is essentially, military dictatorship / mafia, that, they're going to, force the people who don't like them in Gaza to do, what they do, or do what they want to do, because they have the guns, they have the weapons, they have the power in the region. And I don't see how it be possible for a peace agreement to be reached with that area of the country until Hamas is essentially rooted out. And I don't see how Hamas could potentially be rooted out. Well, let me just finish. I don't see how Hamas could be potentially rooted out unless Israel literally occupies the entire country.
That's disgusting. Mm-hmm. Totally disgusting. I hope that doesn't happen. You know what it'll do? It'll be the most counterproductive thing you could possibly imagine. It'll drive hatred towards Israel and the rest of the world. And it would enrage the Muslim world so much that it would, for the first time ever, or for the first time since its inception, it would endanger the state of Israel. Because what are you going to do? You're going to unite the Sunnis and the Shias that have been fighting for all these years in their hatred of you. You're going to unite Saudi Arabia and Iran to potentially attack Israel. And right now, the support for Israel in America is went from very high to now low, headed towards very low. I don't know if the next president, Democrat or Republican, has the same policy towards Israel as we've had for the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years. I don't know that. Imagine Israel without the backing of America. And you're going to take that kind of risk to reoccupy Gaza? That is political malpractice. That would be the worst possible outcome for Israel, let alone the Palestinians. And look, this idea, there's two fallacies here that I cannot stand. we're going to eradicate Hamas. We're going to wipe them out. How do you know when they're wiped out? How do you know? No, seriously, Sitch, tell me, how in the hell would you know that you have now rooted out Hamas? It's purposely impossible so that you occupy them forever and ever and ever. It's sick.
Well, so obviously you're not going to know with like 100% with every single person that supports Hamas is exterminated. But I do believe a country can get a pretty good idea about whether the political power of an institution, the military power of an institution is crippled or ceases to be a viable threat. And I assume you would agree that a country can't really exist if on its borders there's another country or another entity that has a violent, government, whatever you want to call it, arm of the government that is, invading the country, kidnapping and killing people. That obviously there has to be some issue there. And so I'd imagine you'd agree that Hamas in that situation, from Israel's perspective, does need to be rooted out, does need to be eliminated.
No, I don't agree with that at all. Not even close.
No.
So first of all, on the rooted out nonsense. So right now, Gaza's obliterated. Hamas, if it has any military capacity, hasn't shown it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so I could argue that they're rooted out now. And if it's not now, how would you know? More dead Palestinian civilians? How do you know?
You have to go through the tunnels and deconstruct all that stuff.
So you're going to have to go through every tunnel and you think maybe kill all the Hamas soldiers? How would we know that they're all dead? You've gone through every tunnel. No, so this is nonsense. It's an excuse for further massacres and occupation. It's obvious. But let me move on to your second point.
Well, let me ask a follow-up before you move on, which is that again, if you're a country and you have this threat on your border, you need some level of security guarantee before you remove the restrictions and embargoes before you open the border. You don't think you do need any security guarantees? So here,
guys, this is, again, it's such an obvious fallacy. Oh, if you have an enemy on your border, you must occupy them forever. Everybody has enemies on their border. So, for example, there's a dictator on Turkey's border, Bashar al-Assad, Syria. He hates Turkey. The bombs have gone into Turkey. So it's a dictatorial, bloody, murdering opponent on our border. Let's go take Syria. No, you don't take Syria. They're an opponent. They're an enemy. Sometimes you have conflicts with them, and Turkey has gone into Syria. And was Syria supposed to go occupy Turkey? No, by the definition of us living together as human beings, we have all developed enemies on our borders. Not universally, Canada's fine with America, right? Generally speaking. But yes, for 80% of the world, unfortunately, we have enemies on our border, but we don't go occupy them for the rest of time. And so, for example, Israel had a massive enemy on its border. It was called Egypt. And Egypt had started the wars. Egypt was the leader of the Arab world that had attacked Israel twice. And they had gone in across the Israeli border. They'd killed civilians. They'd done Hamas times 10. So under that logic, you should never accept Egypt on your border. Occupy Egypt forever and ever and crush them and make sure, they are too violent. They are savages. You know those Muslim savages. You put your boot on their neck for 56 years or 156 years, and that way they'll learn their lesson of violence. No, that was the stupid and wrong way to go. The smart way to go, which Israel chose, so they can choose to do the smart, moral, and decent thing as they have done in the past. You make a peace deal with your enemies. You don't make a peace deal with Mother Teresa. And then when you make a peace deal, hey, lo and behold, it worked. It's Dick Cheney-esque to say we don't negotiate with evil and we don't negotiate with our opponents. That is literally the only person you can negotiate with. Doing a deal with Finland isn't going to help Israel. You got to do a deal with the Palestinians.
Well, I mean, I guess in response to the Egypt thing, and then because we're kind of running out of time here, is that, there's a difference in my mind between, Egypt, which is kind of exists as this, the government exists as like the official government that has all these institutions in place, kind of more of a traditional government structure with a traditional army who, when, they're at war with Israel, like, Israel's attacking their army. Where with Hamas, it's more like a government / sort of terrorist mafia where, okay, so if Israel tries to attack them, they just kind of like slip, they slip underground, they slip away. They're not really attacking them directly. So to my mind, you can't really use like the same tactics or even the same idea of dealing with Egypt that you would with dealing with Hamas and Gaza.
Yeah, it's just another excuse. So let me break that down. So first of all, who does terrorism? The powerless in every instance. And it's not an excuse for it. I'm going to come back to how awful Hamas is in a second. So the Tamil Tigers, why did they do terrorism? Because they didn't have tanks, so they did suicide bombings. Why did the Japanese start doing kamikaze into the aircraft carriers? Because they were losing and they were desperate and they didn't have a way to sink our aircraft carriers. So they started doing basically, in essence, suicide bombings. So terrorism rises out of powerlessness because they don't have jets and tanks. Now, does that mean that you should excuse it? Hell no. And what Hamas did was both immoral, hideous, and irrational and stupid on October 7th. All they did was invite the wrath of a right-wing government of Israel that they had to know was going to butcher their own civilians. And so that doesn't take away Israel's moral culpability, but it adds more moral culpability on the heads of Hamas. So I think Hamas is not only terrible in what they did and the terrorism and attacking the civilians, but guys, you have to remember, I was born Muslim, raised Muslim, and I'm an atheist now. Hamas is fundamentalist Muslim. They would kill me before they'd kill any of you. So I got no love for Hamas. I got no need for Hamas. I can't stand Hamas. So you name a Muslim fundamentalist terrorist group, and I loathe them with every fiber of their being, and they loathe me with every fiber of their being. Okay, but that's not the question. If you say, well, okay, if you have terrorists here because they don't have F-16s and it's so hard to find them, well, that means what? We're going to have to occupy them forever and ever and ever. Well, all that's going to do is create more terrorism. And the more you bomb them, the more they hate you. Gee, why do the Palestinians hate the Israelis? I don't know, maybe because they've kept them in a prison for 56 years, and maybe because they've taken away all their dignity and pride and economic opportunity and sovereignty. I mean, to think that the Palestinians are supposed to love the Israelis, that's insane. So the longer you keep the occupation, the more they're going to hate you, the more terrorism there's going to be, and the more you're going to say, oh, well, golly gee, there's terrorism, so I have to keep occupying them. It's an unsolvable riddle on purpose to maintain the occupation. And keep it real. Why are they maintaining the occupation? Because they're pouring in settlers into the West Bank. Now, started with nothing. Now it's 750,000 of the most maniacal, fundamentalist religious nut jobs out there murdering Palestinians, stealing Palestinian land. That wasn't the bug, that was the feature. That is why the right-wing government of Israel wanted to extend the occupation so they could bring in more settlers to steal more Palestinian land. So these are all excuses. You make peace with your enemies, whether they're terrorists or a government. And by the way, Israel keeping 5 million Palestinians as prisoners and hostages for over 50 years, that is a moral blight. And if I'm an Israeli, I think do not do that under my name. You're ruining our moral character. You're ruining our reputation in the world. You're driving more hatred towards us. Let those people go. Stop with nonstop nonsense excuses for brutally occupying these people. Let them go, and then the world will love you for it. I know people are skeptical about that. No, they're always going to hate the Jews. Look, there's worldwide anti-Semitism. That is absolutely true, and the Jewish people have suffered greatly through all of human history. And they have been incredibly brave and courageous and not buckling in. They had 1,000 opportunities to convert to Islam, convert to Christianity after all the pogroms and the Holocaust, but they stood firm and said, no, we're going to remain who we are. And they pray for their oppressors. They have a wonderful, beautiful culture. We've got to get back to that wonderful.
Look, we're running out of time, Cenk, and I want to make one last point, and then we'll move on, or we'll wrap it up. Look, I have a completely different perspective here, and look, even in your campaign, you're saying I am afraid of Donald Trump because Donald Trump you perceive as a fascist, someone who's going to be an authoritarian dictator that is going to take what the people want and say, "F you, I'm going to do what I want." So there are these two different structures of government. Obviously, there is the Putin dictator authoritarian of the world, and there is the democracy where the people are in charge and their government serves at their pleasure. Look, Hamas is obviously the dictatorial institutional structure of government. I feel Hamas commits terrorist acts, because it as soon as the people become more democratic and start to become more prosperous, Hamas loses its grip on power. They become less and less powerful. And then they are going to have to get a fucking job and do something that is tougher to do than just reigning over people with violence. So it's more, Hamas will continue this sort of terrorist attack mentality because it serves their purposes to stay in power. It turns it turns Israel against Gaza, and it turns the entire population against Israel. It just serves their purposes. So I think Hamas has to go. And the idea that you're kind of saying, you're fine with Hamas.
I'm not saying that. Don't put words in my mouth. I just told you I hate Hamas. I don't think that it was unclear.
Okay, but they are dictators and they must go. You agree with that?
So, guys, you could say, hey, you know what? China is arguably dictatorial, so South Korea should invade. They have a hostile neighbor that's dictatorial. This is nonsense. So, look, number one, Adam, your analogy has two issues. One, it's flawed. Two, it proves my point. The flaw is you said, hey, I'm worried about Donald Trump as fascist and putting him in charge of the country. Yeah, I would not put the leader of Hamas in charge of Israel. That would be a catastrophe beyond imagination. So, of course not. I'm against fascist dictators, et cetera, the world over. So for the Palestinians, the point that you made about how the more prosperous they are, the worse off Hamas is.
Yes,
exactly.
You agree with that.
Hold on.
Okay.
Exactly. That is why if you do a peace deal and you help Palestine become prosperous, they will have less terrorism.
Hamas is standing in the way of the peace deal.
But how are you going to, guys, you're driving me crazy. You're purposely saying an impossible standard. This thing that is nebulous, that we don't know where they are. We don't know what their command structure is. The Palestinians voted for them now almost 2 decades ago. Now the majority of Palestinians weren't even alive when they voted that way. So how the hell are they supposed to get rid of a dictator if you don't let them have their own country, and they can't have a democracy and they can't rule themselves? Instead, you say, and then what's your excuse for the West Bank? They have
Hamas is the one that took democracy away from them.
No excuse for the West Bank. You just want to occupy the Palestinians. Please just be honest about it. You don't think they're human. You think that they're violent by nature. So you do state violence over and over again.
That is not remotely.
And you imprison them for 50 years.
Look, you don't want me to put words in your mouth. I don't want you to put words in my mouth.
Are you talking about us? Or are you talking about Israel's position in the government? I mean, that's not our position, obviously.
Yeah, that's not our position.
Okay, so
I'm in favor of getting rid of this.
I am addressing the right-wing government of Israel.
Okay.
And if you're just asking rhetorical questions, no problem.
Well, no, I'm not asking a rhetorical question.
Look, we don't think it's based on race. All human beings are the same.
I just don't understand how. I just don't understand how. Like, if right now Israel just pulled back and they said, okay, we've finished our operation or whatever, and they said, okay, we're gonna try to make peace with the people of Gaza, and Hamas, and we're going to open the borders and lift trade restrictions. Then Israel's just going to be in this exact situation a couple of years down the road.
No, it's not, guys. Okay, listen. First of all, you don't just go, oh, okay, let's just pull back and see what. No, you negotiate with who? You're going to want to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. You've already been working with them for decades. They did not attack you. They're not terrorists. They're a partner you could easily negotiate with. Then if you negotiate a peace deal for the West Bank and Gaza Strip with the Palestinian Authority, then you've undercut Hamas's power. Their violence didn't work. The peace deal that Mahmoud Abbas did in the West Bank did work. And then you say now Mahmoud Abbas Palestinian Authority rules both places. And then then you bring them, the Palestinian Authority, into, or they would normally go into Gaza Strip. And then at that point, if a Palestinian Authority and Hamas want to fight internally, that's their business, not our business. You build high walls. And at that point, if Hamas or anyone else attacks Israel, then the whole world is on Israel's side, because that is now a sovereign nation attacking another sovereign nation. And that is totally unacceptable. And guys, if you think you cannot ever make a deal with Palestinians, and I'm saying, again, rhetorically, whoever you
I'm saying Hamas. I'm saying you can't make a deal with Hamas.
I just told you can make a deal with the Palestinian Authority. You say,
I agree.
Using Hamas as an excuse is saying I'm never going to make a deal. I kind of want that land.
Well,
And now cabinet officials in Israel are saying maybe we should keep Gaza. If you want Israel to be in existential danger, that's what you would do. For God's sake, for the Palestinians' sake, for the Israelis' sake, make a peace deal. Right. It worked with Egypt. It works. War never works. Peace actually works. Peace is more practical than war. And the whole world is always going to hate Israel if they keep occupying these people. It is an injustice that needs to be cured. If you do not cure that injustice, you're purposely inviting the hatred of the world on your head. Please don't do that. Please don't do that.
In terms of policy, like my original position would be what I think would be the ideal position, which would be sounds kind of similar to what you're suggesting, which would be for Israel to say, okay, we're going to help, the Palestinian Authority basically control Gaza and become like the official government there, because Gaza and West Bank are kind of in a civil war with each other, or PA and Hamas are. But in order to do that, what that would look like, and maybe I wasn't clear when I talk about like Israel occupying Gaza, is that what I think it would look like is essentially you're saying, okay, the PA is the official government of Gaza. We will basically, Israel is going to have to act as kind of work in conjunction with the PA as a military force to basically occupy Gaza with the PA, where the PA is kind of like the government managing it, and Israel is sort of like the military that's helping the PA fight off Hamas, who would inevitably be at war with the PA if that happened.
No. So, Sitch, there's a super important distinction there. Overall, I understand what you're saying, and it sounds similar to what I'm saying, and it is, but with one giant difference. If they go in and occupy Gaza with the Palestinian Authority, then the Palestinian Authority will lose all credibility with Palestinians. They will be perceived as collaborators with the occupiers, especially after the occupiers just destroyed Gaza. That would be because then you would erode any credibility Palestinian Authority has, and you would empower Hamas. Then Hamas might take over the West Bank. No, the way that deal works is you make a peace deal with Palestinian Authority. That way, Palestinian Authority becomes the heroes that saved Palestine and created the Palestinian state. Then keep Israel out. Then they have the moral credibility to go into Gaza and say, guys, you see, Hamas only brought you grief and death. We have brought you peace and a Palestinian state. Then they have the credibility to maintain a peace with Israel. That's the right way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that theory. I don't know the PA's military forces, if they have enough to root out or to fight Hamas and Gaza on their own. But,
yes.
I guess.
So, Sitch, let me just say one extra thing about that. If you do a peace deal, you know what happens next to the Palestinian Authority? The world pours in tons of money. Qatar does, Saudi Arabia does, America does, Europe does. And then that gives them plenty of firepower to beat Hamas in Gaza. And it's one thing when you have Palestinians in an internal conflict in Gaza. It's another thing when an occupying force comes and kills your children and says, I did it for your benefit. No, the minute an occupying force does it, they'll be hated forever. But if you empower the Palestinian Authority with a peace deal and resources, I think they will easily rout Hamas in Gaza. And that is a thing that could give you stability, peace, 2 states, justice for the Palestinians, and then the Israelis become heroes. That is the correct way to do it. Then the world loves Israel, and we have 2 flourishing states. We build up their economies so that terrorism never it takes root again. That's not only the moral thing to do, it's the practical thing to do to get to the best result for both sets of people.
All right, we're coming up on 2 hours here, so this has been a very spirited debate. I want to try to keep this short so people actually check it out. Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.